Hello, FewCandy here, and welcome back to planetzoo Beginner's Guide. And today we're going to be talking about two key themes. The first of which is landscaping your zoo and adding points of interest. So with that, we're going to be adding a huge lake into our zoo. And then the second thing is path tunneling, because within the lake we're going to be adding a monkey island, essentially, with orangutans and siamangs in an interspecies habitat. But as the island is going to be completely surrounded by water, getting our keeper there will involve tunneling. So we've not really talked about that subject before, so that is going to be the key themes for today. But before we dive into that today, I do want to talk about something that is a pretty common question that I have in the zoo, which is about staff training, and what I haven't really spoken about too much in this series is kind of how and when to train your staff. So you can see here, this is the levels that I've got to now. So in the background, I have been doing some training. And usually what I like to do is, for certain types of staff, is actually train them before I add in an additional member of staff. But then for others, it may be actually better and more financially viable to add in extra staff before you actually train them up. So for vets, for example, we've got several habitats in the zoo. We've only got 3 vets, but they are all on an efficient workload. So right now, I definitely don't need to add any more. I have done a little bit of training. My kind of idea with this is to train at least one of the vets to be pretty high standard. But you can see the difference in price between a level 2 vet and a level 3 vet is about 500 quid. Well, it is 500 quid. So it's quite a lot on their salary basis to train them up. So don't go too quickly with it at all unless you're playing with unlimited money. So for vets, yeah, 3 is absolutely plenty for, I don't know how many species actually we have. Let's take a little look. So we've got 7. We've actually got 8 species, and we have got 4 exhibit species within this zoo. So yeah, that's all you need for that, really. So kind of almost less than half the amount of vets to animal exhibits and animal habitats that you have. With keepers as well, it is a constant kind of battle to upgrade them, honestly. So here we've got the mandrills and the raccoons. They are both pretty high workload. So you'll see I have just trained up this keeper here. And generally speaking, I do find if you keep 1 keeper per habitat, which does seem like quite a high expense, they're usually okay. When we come on to do things like the African safari, where there's multiple animals all in one habitat, then it may be worth having 2 keepers ultimately for that. But see here, like, we're sharing 2 keepers across 2 habitats here. Same goes for the mandrills and the raccoons and the skunks. It's 2 keepers across 2 different habitats. But it really depends on the size of the habitat as well. If you've got 2 small habitats, 1 keeper can be shared between them. And 2 small, easy animals. If it's something like the lions, you're going to want 1 keeper for that entire habitat just to keep on top of it. It's really how I do that. And you'll see most of them are not trained up particularly substantially. The lemurs and prairie dogs, because that was the first ones that I put in, have been trained up now to level 4. They probably don't need to be, though, because their workload is absolutely fine. Same goes for the mechanics, really. Like, unless they have a high workload need like this, then I really wouldn't upgrade them. Because the other 2 are on efficient, I'm not too concerned with that, so I'm going to leave that as is. We've still only got 1 security guard in the zoo, but again, they're on efficient workload, so until they go to high, I wouldn't consider adding in any more security guards. Same with the caretakers, really. Like, I haven't really upgraded most of these at all. I've got 2 which are a bit upgraded. Again, I like to keep things at different levels, just so that you've got some kind of higher members of staff. I suppose the supervisors over the more junior members of staff. Keep a little bit of realism in there. Again, they're all efficient, so there's no problems with that at all. Now, where we do come into a lot of red is on the vendors. So with the vendors, if we go over to the sloth shops over here, we have got 5 different outlets up here. Yes, 5. And if I just filter it by work zone, you can see here we've actually got 6 members of staff. So that is because one of them can cover the breaks essentially of the others. So I have gone ahead and added in an additional vendor for this to try and reduce their workload. And I'm also thinking with these, they're probably going to need a bit of upgrading. Now with the vendors, because their salaries are so much lower than things like keepers and vets, you can afford to upgrade them quite a lot. So you'll see here at the entrance shops, a lot of them are already upgraded actually to level 4 and trained up to level 4. So I would just keep an eye on this ultimately. And when your high workload status comes in, add some extra training. But with a shop complex like this, where they're all 5 or 6 staff are working across the same group of shops, you can add in an additional vendor in this case to support them when they're on their breaks, just to keep those shops open ultimately. So as some of you may remember, our zoo plan was to put the lake in this area, and that's absolutely what we're going to do. But I do want this water from our otter habitat to flow into it. So one big thing I want to check before we actually start is whether this water can be removed and put back in. Now water sometimes, so we'll right click on it here to remove it. Okay, yes it can, because water can sometimes be really, really finicky. If you've put a path over it, sometimes you can remove it and then you can't actually get it back in. So it's always worth checking that. And obviously if I'd removed it there and it wouldn't go back in, I could just click undo and we'd be fine. So it's always worth checking that if you're joining up different watered areas. So yeah, we should be safe with this, but just to be on the safe side as well, when I put in the lake, I'm actually not going to join it up to our stream at the moment. I'm going to terraform out the lake area and then I'm going to remove this, smooth this out and add the water back in, just so that if we need to, we can undo and still have the water in our otter area. Because you only get something like 43 undos, I think it is, and we may do more clicking than that to terraform in our lake. So just before we start as well, I just want to check the boundary requirements for our animals. So we've got the Bornean orangutan here, which is critically endangered as well. So bear this in mind, because this absolutely means we're going to have a lot of guests flooding to this habitat. We're going to want big viewing areas. We're going to want wide paths around it to allow for the influx of guests here. If we click on the natural habitat element here, you can see it's 6 meters wide and 2 meters deep. So that is what we're going to have to go for. And also, if we're having 4 adults in here, there's 930 meters squared, and that's not including the extra that will be needed for the Siamangs as well. Now, I just want to make a quick note on the interspecies enrichment, because there's a few animals here. Now, Majin Pie, massive, massive shout out to you, because I never knew this in Planet Zoo. You don't have to stick to these. So you could put in the orangutan with a gorilla, I guess. You probably wouldn't want to because they're different biomes. But just as an example, you can put them in together, but they're just not going to have this enrichment bonus if you do that. So this is what this is. It's actually animals which are going to add a bonus to your other animals by having them together. So you can totally experiment with that. I wouldn't recommend necessarily putting a lion in with a zebra, because I think you'll get some interesting results there. But yeah, you don't have to stick to this list. So massive, massive shout out to Majin Pie. Thank you so much for letting me know, because I literally never knew that. I thought you were just constrained to the animals in here. But like it says here, this is an enrichment bonus. So the orangutan will be enriched by sharing its habitat with these animals. Not that it can't share its habitat with other animals not on this list. So great piece of information there. Then if we just go to the Siamang as well, they're also endangered. So again, there's going to be an influx of people around this habitat for sure. But very nicely, they are both from Indonesia. They're both tropical biomes. So we shouldn't have any problems with kind of finding enough plants and things like that to put in, because it's definitely going to be quite a heavily jungle sort of environment, very similar to our mandrills actually in that respect. And they do have the same water boundary requirements here. And a quick note on this, because the Lar Gibbon, we could also add them in with these 2 animals, and I actually was intending to do that. However, when we click on the Lar Gibbon, for example, here, now, yeah, it's the same region, it's the same biome. However, they don't have a water boundary requirement, so I'm not sure if they'll actually stay in the habitat or not. So maybe we add them in later and see if it'll work, but for now, I'm going to pretend that we're not adding them in. Because I suspect from that, it does mean that they can probably cross the water somehow. So we'll see how we go. So coming back to the lake, we're going to use terrain stamp tool for this. And I'm going to go for the cylinder one, because the cube will give us some very janky square edges. So I think this will be a little bit nicer for kind of putting in a more natural, flowy looking lake style area. So we're going to go for that. Now, we do want to make sure it's on subtract terrain, obviously, so we're not building on top of the terrain, as we would be if it was like this. We zoom in, you can see we want to be taking away from it to add our lake into it. I'm not worried about angle snap or anything like that for this. This is going to be a pretty flat lake area, so it should be easy enough to do. And the plan is to kind of stamp out the main area, and then we'll go around with our landscaping tools to smooth out the banks and create a little bit more interest in the edges to it afterwards. Now, obviously, with the boundary requirements, we want to make sure we're doing this correctly. So it was 2 meters deep, but actually what we're going to do is go for 4 meters deep. That's actually the minimum that we can do for this, so that should be plenty for the orangutans as well. I think, in fact, actually, let's go for a little bit. Let's go for 6 meters deep for the bulk of our lake, and then we can kind of make the area around the island a little bit shallower if we need to. And then width-wise, yeah, we only need 6 meters for the boundary for the actual island. But in terms of like forming out the main lake, let's just go for a bigger size. It doesn't really matter too much while we get in the main lake area. So we'll come from here and we're literally just going to stamp in like this. And we're just going to keep going and try to draw out a rough lake area. And in fact, actually, do you know what? Let's go up to a much bigger size for this, because it's going to be it's going to be needed to fill out this area, because unfortunately you can't click and drag. And I'm not too worried as well when we go down like this to create different heights. I'm not too worried about that. Let's just undo there. Something weird has happened in that little space. There we go. Because we want to kind of have a variation in the bottom of the lake height as well, so I'm not worried about those. We'll smooth those out afterwards, so don't be too concerned with that. Yeah, we're just going to continue stamping out this really rather large lake, and we want to make it a bit of an interesting shape. We don't want things super uniform, so we'll just keep doing this until we've got a shape that we're happy with. As well, when you're using terrain stamp tools, sometimes you find that like when you click things you'll end up with this, which is essentially cutting out terrain underneath the ground. If you just hit shift on your keyboard, that's going to bring it back to surface level, so that can kind of reset it for you. Now coming up to this area, now obviously I don't want this too wide, so we're going to turn the width right down to, I think we'll go for 7 meters, just so we're giving ourselves a little bit of breathing room with this. And we are going to change it to 4 meter depth as well. And then what we're going to do is create kind of this slightly more narrow passageway as we come through here, and this we want to be a little bit more careful that we're not kind of doubling down on the deepness of it, but obviously we can smooth things off afterwards. So we're going to bring that round like that, and this is essentially going to be our island here. Now it needs a lot of terraforming and a lot of smoothing out, so that is the next thing to do. Now with the banks, I would say on lakes, the biggest tip I have for this is use the push function for this. We can change the intensity down to about 50%, or make it a little bit smaller. If you kind of push the edges of your lakes back like this, you get rid of those janky edges, and it gives you a much more smoothed effect to your lake. And you can keep things a little bit steeper in certain places. Again, that adds a little bit of naturalness and a little bit of variation to your lake as well. If you just keep doing this on a relatively low intensity, you'll have much, much nicer looking banks. And of course, within the middle as well, we'll also want to go round and smooth out all of these dips and bumps that we've created with the terrain stamp tool, just so things are kind of smooth under the water. But having these different depths will also make it look a lot nicer and a lot more natural if our water is a little bit more see-through. So once you have done that, you'll be left with something like this, which looks like a complete mess. Now I have also actually added a small little stream over here and a slightly larger river this side. Now, obviously the annoying thing with this is that you can't go beyond your zoo buildable area. So we have to do some nice kind of techniques to cover up the ends when we come to build in those areas. But I just want to kind of shape out where we're going to have this main water source in our zoo. So the next thing is to see if we can connect up this water. So let's go ahead back into terrain. We're going to remove the water from this side. And then we're just going to go into sculpting. We're going to go to the push function again. We're going to lower the intensity a little bit and just push from one side to the other and see if we can get this in nicely. Now again, like all I've been using to shape this lake is just the push and the smooth functions. There really is nothing else to it. So pushing around the edge, occasionally a little bit of pull. If you go too close to buildings, you might want to pull it out, and getting the angle right is the key thing. You see here, we're just pulling there. We're pulling on the slope. We can see the angle that we're pulling out. We're not just pulling straight out of the ground to create a hill ultimately. So that's really the way to do it. And then lots of smooth as well. And you can turn the intensity up for smooth, just to smooth out the bottom of your lake. And for the little stream as well, the best way to do that, I think, is to use the push function for it, because you'll get much nicer looking boundaries rather than using terrain stamp. So you can just keep pushing and hold your mouse down as you create the kind of flow that you want and the shape that you want there. So let's try the water. So this could be interesting. And sometimes it can take a while to validate the area, particularly when you've got a large area like this. Okay, so that bit's gone in. This is now saying obstructed. Wonderful. Of course it is. Oh, that's valid there. Okay, let's get that in. Is that the height that we had before for our otters? Let's just check what the habitat looks like. It looks like it is, actually. Yeah, that looks to be the correct height. Okay, so that's wonderful. And it has gone into our lake, so now we can kind of see it. We can see the shape of it and where our island's going to be. Now, there are some banks I feel like are a little bit rough here that could have done a little bit more smoothing. So you can kind of see that afterwards, where it probably needed a little bit more push tool along these edges because it's fairly steep down into it. But we can do some nice landscaping, some nice plant decoration around it to make it feel natural. I have also just added in this tiny little extra island, you'll notice over here again, just so we can put some trees on it and make it a little bit more interesting. But I think it feels quite natural as a shape. Our river is very wide over here. It's probably wider than I actually intended it to be, but that's fine. That's fine. I think actually, because we know that that water goes in, we can just do a little bit of refining on this. So I'm going to use the flattened foundation here and just pull this river back just a little bit, just so it's not quite as wide as that. So again, on either side, we're just going to flatten to foundation. If you right click on the height that you want and then just drag, that will do it for you. So we'll do that all the way along here, and then we're just going to have to smooth it out again until we get this absolutely perfect. So the next thing I do want to do is add in our staff path tunnel, ultimately, to get to a building at the back of our orangutan and Siamang habitat over here. So tunnels can be a tricky business, I won't lie, but we're going to give it a go. So we're going to go to staff paths for this, and I think I probably will join it onto the side of here, just so it's in a kind of nice entranceway there. Let's make sure we're on 4 meters. We definitely don't want anything wider. And what I'll probably do is hide this in a building. So we're going to come out straight like this, and then we're going to start to tunnel. So if we go to options here, what we can do is click on tunneling, and that will support this notion. So now we've got tunneling turned on, what we are going to want to do is tunnel this ultimately. So we're going to click J on our keyboard twice, which will give us the steepest slope we can do. And you can see that that actually won't go in. So what we do want to do first is actually add in a short section like that. And then you'll see the ground is now displaced. And now if we click J twice, we will start to go into a tunnel. Now each one of these goes down 2 meters. So that is going to take us to 4 meters deep. Now I think our water is slightly more than 4 meters deep now with the smoothing. So I'm actually going to go down a third time so that it's 6 meters. Then we're going to hit U on the keyboard to bring this back to a straight level. Now you can see this is just firmly underneath the ground. We can't see this. Now actually, yeah, this is extracted by water volume. Now this path is going to be highly unrealistic if you're going down it, but that's not really the point. What we're trying to do here is get in a functional keeper habitat. So we've gone down 3 times. We're actually going to click J twice and go down again because this won't go under the water. And then we'll hit U to go back straight. And yes, now we can flow this under the water. So we need to remember we've gone down 4 times. So we're going to need to bring this back up 4 times, essentially, before we can join it into our little hut at the back. So we're going to keep the path flowing like this. And I want it hidden right at the back, ultimately, because I think we don't want people seeing it. In reality, a habitat like this would be serviced by boat for the keepers. So it's not super realistic in that sense. So I'm going to bend this around here. Now what I'm going to start to do is start to bring it up. And I'm just going to go to the above shot so we can check where we are. So we've actually come a little bit too far. So let's just trim this back by right-clicking with our mouse. And then we'll bring it round to this direction. And now we can start the ascent. So we'll click U twice on our keyboard to make sure it's at the highest elevation. And we're going to keep it coming up. Now it says it's obstructed by water. Yeah, we're obviously gone a little bit too close. So let's actually bring that back down. Let's right click again just to remove our bits of path. We'll go back even further and let's bring it round a little bit closer this time. So then we'll go back to U once we've got it nice and straight, and we'll bring it back to surface level like that. And now what we do want to do is turn off tunneling so that we're not continuously tunneling, and then we can add in our habitat barrier back there. And what we will do is cover this all up with buildings so that you won't even see this. It will be a very private staff entrance and people have no idea that there's a ginormous tunnel going back through our landscape like this. So if we come on to barriers now this is all going to have to be barriered in, but we can use building pieces obviously to make sure that that is the case. But we do want to add in a habitat gate right here. So let's just go to barriers. We'll go for a red brick here. Let's just draw in a section right at the end of our path like that. Because now what we can do is get that habitat barrier gate and place it in like so. We want to make sure it's on the right side so that a little plaque, the little sort of doorstep thing you can see, is sitting on our path here, like that. And that is actually not connected because we can see the tiny bit of grass in between it. So if we go back to start paths, yeah, we just need to click once now, and now that is connected. So if you look really closely at your habitat gates, I'll just undo that so you can see it, and you see that section of grass, that is not connected, and that'll be a reason why your keepers can't get to your habitats. So you just want to make sure you're adding in that tiny bit of extra path needed to make sure it's fully connected there. Now let's go ahead with our null barrier and add in the area that we want. So yeah, let's definitely go to null. And one thing I talked about briefly in an earlier episode was these options here. Now I definitely want to keep flat top for this, just so that we can see it if we're going into the water a little bit, because I am going to create this barrier essentially in the water around this habitat, just because then we know that the animals aren't going to kind of go over the barrier and we're not like worrying about it. And it's absolutely fine for a null barrier to be like this. It doesn't always have to be like right on the edge of the island if you're doing that in this case. So yeah, we can just bring it all the way around and try to keep like sort of maximum space for our animals as well. What we will do is go up nice and close to this staff path like that. And of course we can adjust it afterwards, perfect it afterwards. If we take a little look at how much space we've got now, we've got 3,300. Yeah, that's a that is very, very big. It's much bigger than we actually need, but there's going to be an awful lot of plants and an awful lot of climbing area in this. But actually, it wouldn't matter at all if we blocked off this back bit from them, at least with the building for the staff area. So it could actually be worth changing this up a little bit and adding in a keeper hut as well. Potentially even a staff room, just so that's right tucked in at the back here. And in fact, I do think I'm actually going to go ahead and do that. So there we go. And it was a little bit tricky because the terrain was too uneven for placement around where we've got our tunnel here. So do be mindful of that, because actually you're not going to be able to build right over a tunnel entrance with particular staff facilities or guest facilities like this. Now I'd like to get the animals in, and we need something that is not climbable for these walls. So for the moment, I'm just going to go for concrete. And what I'm actually going to do is just upgrade all of these barriers here. And we'll go on a little bit further this way and into the water, and we're going to upgrade that to concrete for the moment. And then we're also going to just lift up the height of this, which I can't remember what it actually is. So it's more than 5 meters for the orangutan and more than 5 meters for the siamang actually. So yeah, let's select this whole thing again. We'll go to edit barrier, select the whole barrier, and let's change this to 5 meters all the way around. Now this is going to look horrific. This is going to be a null barrier we're going to build around it, but that is going to stop our animals from escaping for the time being. So now we can press play, and I've already sent our orangutans and our siamangs into quarantine, and you can see that they've passed, yes, because here they are there. So now we can move them into the habitat here, delivery scheduled, and we'll wait for them to arrive. We'll check the size of it is okay for them, and then we'll start building out everything that they need and developing a really beautiful landscape for them. There we go, we've got our 4 orangutans and our 4 siamangs nicely in, and if we click on them, we can see straight away we've got way too much space. Now, one thing that you probably want to avoid doing this, I'm okay because I've got a lot of money, but actually having too much space is going to cost you a lot more in land tax when it comes to your budget. So if you're not making money in your zoo, it's quite likely due to land tax and making habitats a little bit too big, like I do. We've got enough of a zoo here to kind of make money, so it's not so much of a problem. But in the early game, really avoid over-delivering like this, essentially. Now, this land is going to go down because we're going to add foliage, so you always want to add a little bit of a buffer, but this is too much. Like, we've got double the amount of size. But what it does mean is we could try and add in our Lar Gibbons and see if they will go in and not escape via our water barrier here as well, because this is the other thing to check. Yeah, they cannot escape. So this is good news indeed. Now, obviously, what we do want to do is make sure we're completely secure in our building aspects around this area once we remove this concrete barrier to make sure they can't escape via there either. But at the moment, we're absolutely fine on that basis. And of course, now we've got them in as well, what we do want to do, we've got some research complete there, is change our vets onto researching them. So let's put Wendy on the orangutans, and let's actually divert one of these onto the siamangs as well for the time being, so we can start cracking on with that. Now, in the background as well, do keep up with your research. Like you'll see here, I've researched most of the diseases actually. Like, we haven't done any of the advanced research as of yet on any of the animals, so we will do that once we've got everything researched here, but we're well on our way to it. Same goes for the mechanic research as well. Keep that up. Like, I've got everything unlocked here. We just started researching the brand new Oceania theme, actually getting all of the blueprints for that just so I can see what they're like. But yeah, you do really want to keep up with the research. So with my vets, typically I've got 3 here, but one of them is always going to be on research until everything is researched or when new animals come in. And with the mechanics, same for them. So I've got 3 mechanics. One of them is pretty much always on research. Okay, so I have actually just added in our little Lar Gibbons here. And the great news is, even though it doesn't say that a water barrier is applicable for them, they absolutely still does work. So we can have our Lar Gibbons, our Siamangs, and our Orangutans all in this environment. And also the other thing with this is obviously that space requirement has also increased here. And this is without the full adult population, without any babies. So I'm kind of a little bit more comfortable with the space that we're offering here. We obviously need a lot of climbable area. And similar to the other 2, the plant coverage is all tropical and we can go absolutely nuts with it. So great news there. I've also added in a staff work zone for Monkey Island, which is the staff room, the keeper hut, and this habitat. So actually the 2 keepers that I have assigned to this, and I have done 2 because we've got 3 animals in here. And the orangutans and the Siamang in particular are kind of high maintenance, as it were. So yeah, having 2 keepers I think is well worth it. Also, the space is rather large for them cleaning up poo and the such like. So we've got 2 keepers on this habitat and they're both assigned to here. So they actually shouldn't need to actually go down underneath the tunnel at all. We'll only need a mechanic, a vet and a caretaker, etc. to come up here when needed. So it's all pretty nicely self-contained. Now, before we come on to actually designing out this habitat, I do just want to talk about one new feature from the latest update, which is viewing domes. So let's just actually go ahead and create ourselves a pathway here because I'd really like to add one in. So I think this is 8 meters wide. Yes, it looks like it is. So let's continue this path on round here. And we're actually just going to come up to this point and start snaking it back round. And that path will continue on kind of round the edge of the lake, essentially. Let's actually turn off angle snap for this so we can get it in a little bit more nicely around the edge of the lake there, and then we'll worry about bridges, etc. in a minute. Now, I do want a big viewing platform here too, so let's go ahead and add that. So I think wood would be quite nice for this. I'm thinking beach boards, potentially. And we definitely want it to be really super wide and nice. So what I'm actually going to do is I'm going to hold control. We're going to separate from this and we're going to hold shift as well while we're holding control and just raise it up just a tiny bit. So if I hit control again, that height has been maintained, because what this does mean is we can build essentially a viewing platform over this edge here. So if I place that piece in, and this will get them a little bit closer to the monkeys than they were before. So let's add those 2 bits in. Then let's go align to grid. We'll select them. Yeah, we've got that. And then we've got square edges on. Yes, and then we can start to build out a really large viewing platform for these animals like this. I'm thinking literally that big. So if we go to deselect grid, let's see if we can actually get a connection in here, because this may be a little bit too close to our path. Yeah, we're okay over this side. I would really like a second connection though. Okay, little stairs. Okay, that's kind of all right. It's like an accessible route in and a stepped non-accessible route in. Yeah, I don't mind that. So now we have got our viewing platform up here. Let's also just click play and let's just make sure with these animals that they can't jump across onto the viewing platform, because that would be a little bit of a disaster. So let's find a gibbon. Yeah, we're okay there. Let's also find a Siamang. And yeah, we're fine there. So that is absolutely fine as a viewing platform. And yeah, it will get them really nice and close, or a little bit closer at least, to the monkeys. And in particular, the feeding platform I want to put right at the front somewhere so that it's kind of pride of place there. So going on to the viewing domes, what we do want to do here is actually adjust the barrier. So let's come into this and we're going to move the barrier so that it's really close to this path. So we probably want to add in some extra bits actually. So let's add in an extra post there and we'll bring this up to this side. I'm going to click that segment, click plus, and we can't add one in. The panel is too long apparently. So let's just move that up. Try this again. Yes, there we go. We can add in an extra segment so that we can move this around a little bit more freely. So we're going to come up like that. And then for the viewing domes, what we do need to do is in the barriers, you'll see this viewing dome entrance. So this is why I'm extending the barrier out here, because it does need to be in this side. So I'd like that a little bit more straight to the path. So let's just bend that back a little bit like that. We'll add this in here. We can do some nice rock formations, I think, around this, but that can go in like that. And then the viewing dome itself is actually in guest facilities. If we search for Zome, you can find it easily there. And all you have to do for this is just actually drop it into the habitat and it will automatically connect to this entrance. So in effect, there's like a secret tunnel ultimately coming round to this, but I think it would be really cool to add in here. So let's drop it in. Let's kind of do it right towards the back a little bit, like next to this little mound that we've got here. I think would be pretty cool because then we could sort of look up to the monkeys there. We can have some climbing apparatus going right over the top of it. And I think it'll be kind of a cool VIP experience ultimately for this habitat. So that will do nicely there. Let's just click play again. And I just want to make sure I'm very over cautious on this. Yeah, that they can't suddenly jump onto this piece of land. Now we've extended those barriers. So no, we are all good there. So now we're moving on to build out firstly our guest viewing platform area and then the habitat afterwards. Now I am doing this in a speed build and I know some of you have commented it's a bit too fast to follow. On YouTube you can actually change the speed down to half time or even a quarter of a time. Now I do all of my speed builds at 400%, so if you put it down to a quarter of time you'll essentially be watching it in real time so you can see exactly what I'm doing. And really the reason for putting it in a speed build is just because these episodes would be so long and I'll be telling you the same information over and over again that I just don't think it's a great viewing experience for those that are comfortable with it and just really want to see the design process. So those options are always there. Please do remember to mute me if you're going to half time or quarter time because it's not going to sound good at all. And also as well, everything that I'm doing here is building techniques that we have covered in previous episodes in the series. So head into the playlist, which is linked in the description below. And if you go back to the first, second and third episodes, there's lots about building tips within those, all on real time and talked through. But that being said, if there are certain things that you're struggling with, please do drop them into the comments below. And patrons as well also get access to my episode planner. That's always the first place I look. If you've got specific questions or topics that you want me to cover in Zoo, let me know on there or let me know in the comments below and I really will try and do as much as I can in a tutorial style for you because I know this game is pretty complex and hard to get your head around. So moving on to the guest viewing area, I decided I wanted to use these driftwood pieces from the brand new Oceania pack. If you haven't picked that up, please do consider using my instant gaming link, which is in the description below. There are some great discounts available on all the planetzoo DLCs amongst so many other games, and it also helps to support the channel. But yeah, these pieces are gorgeous. Like I wanted to create this kind of very Indonesian, even though it's Oceania, it's kind of similar territory of the world, I suppose. But I wanted to create this very Indonesian looking open shelter with a thatch roof for this area with lots of wooden poles essentially instead of walls. So I actually decided to use some of the wall pieces so that I could measure these out a little bit more accurately, knowing that the path grid that I had put in for the viewing area was all kind of multiples of 4, made this a hell of a lot easier. So that's always a good trick to do. But actually I found this incredibly difficult. Like these driftwood pieces are not straight and are not uniform. So actually lining them up into kind of straight line patterns was incredibly difficult. And you'll see me here doing 4 walls wide all in one go. I actually ditched this idea in a minute and just decided to go for 2 panels to make it a lot more simple, perfect those and then copy them across. Because again, like we know that our paths are all multiples of 4, so it's very easy to do that if you have lined things up in that way. But yeah, they are not easy to work with at all, and there are some imperfections certainly in them, because the medium pieces actually only came in a length of 4 meters, not in 6, so it made it kind of tricky doing these cross patterns that you can see here. But in the end, with a lot of playing around and actually ending up turning off angle snap so I could be a bit more freeform in the angles that I was putting in these cross pieces, made it an awful lot easier. Yeah, if you look up close, there are some imperfections where some of the logs overlap each other, but this was ultimately the best that I could do in this situation. And I think my biggest tip is definitely including those wall pieces, because you'll see I delete them out in a second. But having them in meant that I could align the pieces to the surface using the option. So using that option means that everything's kind of going to be perfectly lined up by 90 degrees. So then you can use angle snap to align them exactly to the edges of your wall to get things nice and straight and nice and uniform in. So that's my biggest tip really for doing structures like this. And of course, as always, do one wall piece like I'm doing now and then copy it across your building. Don't try and build the whole thing manually because it will just take you far, far too long. So now starting the habitat, what I wanted to be the focal point of this was a massive tree house right in the middle of the habitat for all of the different monkey species that we have here. So I started by selecting 2 nice big shady trees that would look appropriate for our tree house to sit under, and then started laying out the climbing pieces. I obviously wanted this to expand between the trees and added supports to make this look super realistic. And I realised actually that the 4x4 platform wasn't going to be big enough for what I wanted here to expand around the massive tree trunk for the largest tree that we had in here. So I ended up using the 1x1 pieces. This was all a big mistake. What I should have done is created one of these and then copied all of them. So yeah, I went the long way about this, but I think it turned out really, really nicely in the end. And my biggest tip from this section of the time-lapse is when you are using the Control-X advanced move function, so you click on a piece and you click Control-X, you're going to copy that piece, but also have it in advanced move on the same axes that you've already placed that existing piece that you've just copied on. Once you've done that, before you actually place in the next piece, you can go and change the construction piece that you're using. So this is a really useful way if you're wanting everything to align, like I did with these platforms. I used a 1x1 piece, used Control-X on it, and changed it to a 1x2 piece just to fit into the end and make sure that everything was still really aligned. So definitely use that. I think Control-X is the best building function that you can really get to grips with, so take your time playing around with it and understanding it. Like I said before, align to surface is absolutely key in this, so use align to surface and then turn it off if you don't want it afterwards, but turn it on, add in a new piece, align to the existing surface, use angle snap, and then you can move it around and rotate it whatever 90-degree angles you want to make sure things are lined up correctly. That's really my #1 building tip, full stop, in planetzoo. And the whole idea of this was I wanted this big treehouse in the centre and then lots of vines and a smaller treehouse off to the side that the monkeys could connect to, just so that we've got lots and lots of kind of tree activity ultimately and climbing activity going around the habitat. Now, of course, they want sheltered bedding areas for this, so adding a roof on was super important, and I ended up deciding to go for the Indonesian thatched roofs for this because they look super, super cool. So that was from the Indonesia DLC you can find these in. But with the second tree being a little bit lower, actually it wasn't feasible to add in roofs all the way along this section. So I actually added a second kind of climbing layer to it, which you'll see in a moment, which kind of extends underneath it as a little bit of a secret hiding place, I thought, but maybe for the Lar Gibbons because they're a little bit on the smaller side. I'm not sure an orangutan would really necessarily fit up there. But I really, really like how this structure turns out in the end. And I think, you know, don't be afraid to actually build your own climbing apparatus like this rather than just using blueprints, because it can end up looking pretty samey. But as this time lapse goes on, you will see for the habitat that I do incorporate quite a few blueprints into it. And the reason for this is just a huge time saver, and actually I think a really nice way to make your habitat look customized and different to other habitats is to incorporate certain bits of the blueprint climbing apparatus that we have into your own smaller type of builds, and then you can kind of run it all together how you want and fit them all together how you want, and that gives you quite a customized look. Now, I know this is a beginner's guide series, and I kind of originally said I wouldn't use blueprints, but I do think for the climbing it's a super massive time saver. And also, yeah, like I said, don't be afraid to use blueprints in your builds, and there's ways that you can build around it to customize them for yourself and fit them into exactly the area that you have. So coming on to covering up this horrible tunnelled path and stuff area, what I decided to do, keeping in with the Indonesian theme, was actually try to build some kind of temple around these buildings. I'll be honest, I'm not really too sure I like how the building turns out. However, you will see that we do cover it up a lot with foliage and trees and things like that. So it's not too noticeable in the end. But I use these painted temple brick assets to try and get them to this kind of dark grey to match some of the Indonesian temple pieces, which come with the Indonesian DLC. I was also very conscious that I wanted to make sure the staff path areas didn't look too disastrous, so there was a little bit of detailing around those, so we built the walls in around that, so it felt like very much that you were coming up into a kind of temple complex, or at least a designed area, as opposed to just leaving it completely unfinished. But again, trying to keep this building simple, I stuck everything onto just one grid, and when I came to do the second layers to it, all I did was in the options is change the grid size to 2 meters rather than the 4 meters. So that meant that actually you can then build slightly off but still uniform size areas all on top of each other to give this kind of layered temple look to it. So that's what I did there, very similar to the techniques that we used actually in episode 1 of this series, so if you want more details on that, do go back to that episode and check it out. Now I would just say at this point in the video, if you're not subscribed to the channel, please do consider hitting the subscribe button and dropping the video a like if you're enjoying it. Half of my planetzoo watchers are actually not subscribed to the channel, and I know that I mostly do City Skylines content, but this series is very much still ongoing, and I'm hoping to bring other planetzoo content to you guys in the future as well. So if you hit that subscribe button, then you will see in your subscription feeds when something new is uploaded from the zoo game if cities isn't your bag as well. Now this temple kind of ended up getting quite fiddly, I won't lie. Like these corner pieces, I could have just moved the straight pieces up so that they aligned nice and kind of uniformly at a 90-degree angle, which would have been the simpler option, but I wanted to add some decoration to it. So I ended up adding in numerous different pieces actually to get this kind of temple look that I wanted, including little trellises along each layer, pillars on each layer as well to decorate it, and added little star patterns, some outside pillars onto the walls as well. I think that's a really good tip when it comes to building, is don't just kind of stop at wall and window pieces essentially. Have a look at what props you've got, go through the prop menu, explore, experiment with different things. Adding props to walls can really bring a building alive, even if it's just a case of adding some extra stone beams like we do in this temple, or wooden beams depending on the style of your building. That can really help to give you that customised look and make things look a little bit more realistic and much more interesting than just using wall pieces. So that's really my number one tip when it comes to building structures. Now in terms of the rest of the time lapse, I don't fully show you all of this temple build. I show you all of the different elements that goes into it, but it was a hell of a lot of repetition to get it down to each level ultimately, so you can see exactly how I built it, but I won't show you the entire thing because you'd be sat here for ages. And then on the rest of the habitat as well, I'll leave you to enjoy that. It's very much just about natural detailing, adding in the vines, a few more enrichment items for our monkeys, rocks around the place as well. Again, everyone asked me which DLC they should get if I've got any recommendations. The aquatic pack rocks are so invaluable to pretty much any habitat. I can't recommend the aquatic pack more, really, even just based on those faux rocks that you can change the colours of to match whatever theme that you have. They are so useful. Beyond that, in this particular build, I'm very much loving the Indonesian DLC, the Indonesian pack. These temple pieces are really cool, and then you've also got things like the thatched roofs and other wood pieces as well, which are just fantastic. So I'll leave you to enjoy the rest of the time lapse, and I'll catch you at the end for a build review. So there we go. And I have to say, one of the things I'm absolutely loving about this is the noises that these animals make. It's really quite incredible. I know the Siamangs actually in particular make some pretty loud... Oh, there we go. Some pretty loud calls in real life. So it's just so nice seeing it in the game. So satisfying hearing all those monkey sounds. And they're playing on all the vines. Like, I absolutely love this. This view from the dome is pretty cool here. You've got monkeys running across the vines above you, monkeys running all around looking at the enrichment items. You've got the orangutan up there. Like, it's pretty cool indeed. Oh, there's one right on top of the rock that's actually here as well. So I will fully admit that this bit was pretty cheaty by the fact that I did plop in this kind of blueprint area, climbing area here with the vines. I've just seen a monkey running across the bridge. It's super exciting. But actually, yeah, we have kind of customized it, like I said, by adding in an extra tree, extra vines, adding in the bridge over here onto a climbing frame. Like, it's really kind of come together really, really nicely. And I don't think you could tell that it was just simply that blueprint plopped in this area. Oh, the Lar Gibbons are amazing. The animations of them as they run across these vines is just so cool. So cool. Yeah, really, really loving it. I did contemplate having a section of the temple that they could climb on, but it proved just too tricky with the null barriers inside it and with the staff path that we obviously can't put inside the habitat inside it. They were climbing kind of all over it, so it wasn't feasible. But in real life, that would absolutely be the case. Kind of back here, it's a little bit more plain because I don't really want the monkeys spending too much time back there. Hanging off the logs as well. I just absolutely love it. But this front bit is definitely where all of the action is between the two tree houses and the vines running across here. So satisfying to watch all of this, and I'm loving having the 3 different species in here as well. It's, yeah, worked really nicely. Now, in terms of the undergrowth, these are custard apple trees buried into the ground, and these are tree ferns buried into the ground. So when you're thinking of bushes and kind of undergrowth, really consider those as an option. And also the I'm going to totally butcher it, but the scabiera bushes as well, pushed right down into the ground, create this kind of nice overgrowth effect around some of the aquatic rocks, as I mentioned. And the vines as well, adding those to the tree house really kind of brought that together and then integrated it into obviously the blueprint and some of these like cork trees that we have over here. Really, really nicely indeed. Yeah, I think once they have babies and there's a few more animals in here, this is going to be incredibly, incredibly satisfying to watch. Let's just go and check out this little gibbon hanging on for dear life on this massive log. Oh, and he's swinging! Oh my goodness. I just love it. I just absolutely love the primates and the monkeys in this game. I think they're done really, really well. And of course, with the latest update as well, we got some more orangutan movements added to the game. Now, I haven't really noticed what is too different about it, but they are superb looking animals. Oh, there's one asleep over here. We can go and take a look at this guy. Oh, look at that. So incredible. So yeah, just wider shot of the island. You can see the temple here. I have really tried to hide it because I really didn't like it too much, but I think out in the lake it fits in quite nicely with all of these rocks, with again the tree ferns and some of the bushes kind of buried into the rocks, making it look a little bit overgrown. Looks nice there. And then we come round to this corner and we've got this extra climbing frame with a few enrichment items on the corner here too. So they kind of really spread out along the front. Yeah, that was the main thing for it. And then the guest viewing platform. Let's take a little look at this, because yeah, this was an absolute ball ache, honestly, to get in with all of the non-uniform poles being used. But I think it has come out really nicely, just as a very simple framing and shelter for the guest area here. And we've also added in a viewing talk, an education talk point. I've added a new educator to our zoo and linked in this seating as well. There are a lot of guests flooding to this area though. I have actually, for information now, also limited the amount of guests in my zoo to 2,500 because I was just finding sometimes when they gather all in one place, the frame rate goes absolutely nuts. So limiting your guests can really help if you're having frame rate troubles, and I've got a pretty decent PC. I did also, over by this entrance as well, add in another house to kind of support our village. Now this all needs an absolute ton of detailing around here and around the guest viewing platform as well. So I'm thinking potentially next episode and of course the lake, we need bridges, we need decoration around the lake too. I'm thinking the next episode we're going to focus on landscaping essentially and detailing around habitats and around buildings. If you would enjoy that, please do let me know in the comments below. The other alternative, and the next thing we will be going on to, is actually building this up towards a big plaza with a restaurant overlooking the lake and the rest of the zoo up here, and doing a bit more terrain terraforming to get this into a nice like raised plaza over this side. So those are the two options for the next video. Let me know what you might prefer to see in the comments below. But for today, that is going to be it. So if you have enjoyed the episode, please do drop me a like, a comment, or a share. They really, really help. And like I said before, over half of you are not subscribed to my channel, so please do drop me a subscribe. I'm ever so close to 25k, so I'd love to get there, possibly by the end of this year. And also by hitting that, then you'll know when the next Planet Zoo episode's coming out. And I'm really hoping to get these more regular. The first couple of videos in this series are now amongst my best performers, so obviously I know that there is demand for more of this series, and I will keep it up. It's definitely still ongoing. You'll just need to bear with me with the episodes, and I'll get them out as frequently as I possibly can. Hopefully more frequent than they have been, just because of this step up in the views that I've had. So thank you all so much for the support on this series. But that is all from me for now, so thank you so much for tuning in, and I'll catch you again next time. Bye bye!